Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 9, Unbeatable Enemy. Episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. Ichigo learns the truth of his mother's death, that she died protecting him from a hollow named the Fisher King, who he ends up fighting in this episode. However, in the end, though he does manage to injure him, the Fisher King does manage to escape and get away, while the Shinigami who had come from Soul Society to investigate Rukia helps Ichigo in the fight before deciding to return to Soul Society in order to give his report. So now that I've rewatched the episode, I'm going to rank the episode on our two ranking lists. On this channel, we rank on a mostly objective ranking list, which is absent emotion. And then for the emotional perspective, we also rank on the second list, which is our personal ranking. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values. I've highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. To start off with, we have our single arc supporting character development, and this is the Shinigami who has come from Soul Society in order to investigate Rukia and why she hasn't returned to Soul Society in all this time when she was just sent to the human world for a brief mission. And we see that even though he was, accusing Ruki of a crime in the last episode and very shocked that Ichigo has the Shinigami's powers, when Yuzu and Karen are attacked by the Fisher King, he does step up to help out in the fight, and that he also kind of gives Ichigo a bit of a pep talk once he gets injured. And at first they worry that the injuries had caused his death, but then they hear him snore and realize that he's just gone to sleep due to the severity of his injuries. And then, of course, before he leaves, he returns to Soul Society, but he tells Rukia not to worry, as he's not the type to get in the way between a serious couple. Obviously, we know that unfortunately Rukia and Ichigo are not a couple, though I still stand by what I say that they would have made a great couple, and I am pro them as a couple versus any of the other options Ichigo might end up with. I think Rukia and him would be an amazing couple, and clearly the Shinigami agrees with me. And anyways, that is all worth 1 point. And then we have a successful emotional impact while Ichigo is battling the Fisher King. The Fisher King disguises his lure as his mother and basically is using that to kind of stop Ichigo from attacking him while he's still free to attack Ichigo, because obviously Ichigo would not want to attack the likeness of his mother, even if he knows that isn't his mother. However, what it appears happened is because the Fisher King is the one who killed his mother, spoiler, her pre-death thoughts were recorded in the Fisher King's lore, apparently. So there's like this blue light and a bunch of lightning sparks come off it, and then we see Ichigo's mother's ghost appear, and she gives a speech about how much she loves him and the rest of the family and how much she wants them to live and know peace and be safe, and that she was happy to die for them because they mean so much to her before she fades away. And this gives Ichigo the drive to be able to land an attack on the Fisher King, where he does end up injuring the Fisher King, which sends the Fisher King running away, but he is unable to chase the Fisher King, and it does get away in the end. But that moment when the mom's ghost appears and the speech that she gives and the impact that you can clearly see that it has does leave an emotional impact on the audience. And so for that reason, it is a plus 3 points. We then move on to our multi-arc main character development, which is Ichigo, who gets some closure for his mother. In the last episode, he was saying how it was all of his fault. He's the one who killed her. Now we find out, no, you didn't kill her. you may have been the reason that she was put in danger. We're not going to deny that. But the one who killed her is the Fisher King. And now he knows who his target is for revenge because he knows who was actually responsible, which is this Fisher King. And later he expresses to his father how he feels survivor's guilt, how he feels it's his fault, and he would feel better if Karen, Yuzu, and his dad were to blame him, but they don't, and he doesn't really get why because he feels that survivor's guilt. And his father reminds him that Masaki, who is the mother, was the woman that he loved, and the woman that he loved was willing to give up her life to save her child, and that Ichigo cannot forget that he is the child that his wife, the love of his life, was willing to give up her life to protect, and therefore he should be happy, he should live in peace, he should grow old and die after he does, and so on and so forth. Basically, a very cute moment between father and son, which is rare in this TV show because the father is such a goof character that it is very impactful when he is serious, which I think would tie into the successful emotional impact as well, though not to the same extent as the mom's ghost speech. And then we also kind of get a little bit more information about Rukia as she flashes back to a past where presumably there was a similar situation of somebody fighting and maybe an opponent that they were outmatched by, and where she wanted to interfere, but was told by a character that is, we know as rewatchers in the future, is one of the captains, but at this point he was kind of not fully shown on screen and was kind of kept ambiguous and obviously not named, so it's not a character introduction for him, but where he's telling her that there are two types of fights, the types of fights where you're fighting for your life and ones where you're fighting for your honor, and if you're fighting for your honor, interfering would be a disgrace, and so Rukia holds herself back from trying to help Ichigo because he asked her to stay back and he is fighting for his honor. And that just gives us a little more insight into Rukia's past as we are flashing back to Soul Society and to her conversations with other Shinigami. And then that was worth 4 points, and our last positive for this episode is some world building, and this is where we learn that there are certain hollows that even the Shinigami have trouble with, and those hollows are typically given code names by the Soul Society and the Shinigamis there. In the case of this episode, we are greeted by the Fisher King, is the codename that was given to him, and he has been on the loose for 50 years, unable to be defeated by any of the Shinigami sent after him. And the way that he hunts is he disguises his lure as a human, and basically only those with particularly strong spiritual energy would be able to actually see the lure. So it is a way to basically bring in souls with high spiritual energy that are the most beneficial to him with ease. So in the case we saw in the previous episode, Ichigo was walking with his mother. He has very high spiritual energy even back then. He was able to see the lure that looked like a little girl. He ran to try to protect the little girl, and his mother ended up dying. And the Fisher King even says that the reason that the mom died is that even though Ichigo was the one with the high spiritual power that was able to see the lore, he has a preference for killing women, so he decided to go after the mom instead of Ichigo, and that's probably why Ichigo ended up surviving, which is just crap. But that's what they said. And then we also reveal a new Bakudo number 9 Geki that Rukia casts on the Fisher King to try to immobilize him, but it is shaken off pretty quick and doesn't really do much, unfortunately. Her spiritual power hasn't quite recovered yet. But with all of those together, it does bring us to a score of 12, and as the highest score possible is a 10, this episode will be a 10 out of 10 as there are no negatives that would bring the score down. So, as a reminder of our arc rankings so far, on the mostly objective ranking, in first place, we have The Day I Became a Shinigami, The Shinigami's Work, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish, Fight to the Death, Ichigo vs. Ichigo, June 17th, Memories in the Rain. This episode, Unbeatable Enemy, falls into sixth place. And then we have Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, Beat the Invisible Enemy, and Cursed Parakeet is in ninth. The reason that Unbeatable Enemy falls into sixth, even though it is also a 10 out of 10 episode, is that on the objective list, when multiple episodes have the same score, they are just ranked in episode order, and this series so far has had a lot of 10 out of 10 episodes, and that's mostly because they are feeding us information in bits and pieces, which cause the mostly objective rank values to apply to almost every episode. Now, one of the reasons that I have the personal ranking separate from the objective ranking is so that emotions can cause an impact, because with the mostly objective, it's based on the values and the values that apply to the episodes. So as you can see with this series, a lot of episodes have scored a 10 out of 10 simply because of how slowly we're getting the information, as I mentioned before. So with the personal, this I think is a more realistic idea of where the episode kind of falls, because it's more based on emotion and entertainment value and opinion. But first, we'll talk about kind of like some of the things that stood out to me in this episode. The first thing was that while Ichigo was fighting the Fisher King, I happened to notice that he was giving out some pretty good advice. He was kind of lecturing Ichigo throughout the fight, like you're young, you're reckless, you're coming at me with no strategy, you're not going to be able to win this way, you have to kind of step back. And I'm sitting there like, why are you trying to lecture the person on how to beat you better? Like, do you want to die? But I found that was kind of interesting to me how they had the enemy giving a lecture to Ichigo on how to fight better when he is actively fighting him. And you know what? That lecturing it got him injured and having to flee in almost defeat. So if you want to be a villain, do not lecture the heroes on how to defeat you. Is a bad idea. But I found that was kind of amusing. I also think that using his mother's face on the lure against Ichigo was okay. So here's the thing, from the Hollow's perspective, that's really clever. Obviously, that's going to weaken your enemy. That's very strategic. That is a smart move. However, from the emotional standpoint, what a crap move. And just like the meanness of it. Like, but at the same time, I'm not an overly emotional person. Like, I don't let my emotions rule my behaviors. So for me, it's not really super understandable how that would work, because in your logic brain that it is not real, that is a lure. You have literally just watched them change a lure that is not your parent into the face of your parent. Obviously, people who are ruled by emotion, and he is very emotional in this episode, maybe forget that and therefore hesitate to cut it down. But I do find, like, if you know it's not real, you know that with certainty, you have seen it just change into your mother's likeness. You're not harming your mother, and you know you're not harming your mother by cutting it down. So I do not see why it works, because I feel like I would cut it down anyways because I'd know it's not real and have the logical mindset, because my mindset tends to be more logical, to be like, she's already dead. This is like a clone. This is a fake. I'll cut it down because ultimately I want to get revenge and defeat you, and that is how I do it. I'm a bit more cold on that. So I was a bit iffy on that part. I'm like, I get it, why the Fisher King would use the mother's face, and I get that Ichigo in this scenario is very emotional, which is why it worked, but at the same time, it didn't fall, like, it fell a little flat for me. And then another thing, which the emotional impact from this, as I noted on the mostly objective list, was successful. I did feel something while she was giving the speech, but and it could be a mistranslation, like it could be a translation error, but they're like, it recorded the thought at the moment of death. And I'm like, she had enough time in her moment of death to think out an entire like speech. That's just like I know that that was for the emotional impact, but I'm like, in the moment that you die, you have a moment. How do you get like a 2-minute speech in your moment of death laid out so that you can tell that to your children later? And why, when you're in your moment of death, are you not thinking something simple like, I love you, I hope you live well? Why are you thinking out a literal speech? I just found it odd. I'm going to say that. I found it odd. And additionally, I am now 100% convinced that the author of Bleach has a fetish for shoulder wounds because once again, we got not one but two shoulder wounds. Actually, you could even say three shoulder wounds in this fight. We have Ichigo being injured on the shoulder by the hollow. At the end, when he injures the hollow before it gets away, he injures the hollow's shoulder. And then the third one, which may or may not count, we have the guest Shinigami who basically got stabbed in multiple places. However, one of the places he did get stabbed was once again the shoulder. This author loves shoulder wounds so much. It is a definitive pattern at this point that if a character is going to be getting injured in a fight, it is going to be their shoulder. I am convinced that there is a fetish going on here. 100%. But overall, I found that it was an enjoyable episode. I also like that we're getting build up of the lore, build up of Ichigo's background and his past. We get to learn more about the mother who is dead at the start of the series, so we haven't really gotten to know much about. I love that, we get that touching moment between mother and son and then father and son. Overall, I felt like this was a very strong episode. However, that being said, there were also some things that didn't make sense for me personally. There were some things that kind of fell flat where I knew logically what they were trying to do. It just didn't feel like it made sense to me personally. And as this is my personal ranking list, that matters. And I know that there are better episodes coming up, and I know that there have been worse episodes. And so ultimately, I decided to give this one a ranking of 6 out of 10 overall, which then brings our personal ranking so far to, in first place, the older brother's wish, the younger sister's wish. 2, beat the invisible enemy. 3rd is the Shinigami's work. Cursed Parakeet. This episode is in 5th place, unbeatable enemy. 6th was June 17th, Memories in the Rain. 7th was The Day I Became a Shinigami. 8th, Greetings from a Stuffed Lion. And then last place so far on my list in 9th is Fight to the Death, Ichigo versus Ichigo. And that now brings us to our final segment, which is, of course, the series ranking so far, where we're going to be ranking each of the different arcs against each other. And so far in the Agent of the Shinigami arc, with the addition of 10 for our mostly objective ranking in this episode, we are at 81 out of 200. And on the personal ranking side, we are adding 6 and have reached 53 out of 200. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami arc, episode 9, Unbeatable Enemy. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.